all of a sudden I was in charge of my own professional development. And that's the first time. I'm like almost 30 and I'm only just feeling empowered enough to be like, no, these are the things I want to learn. I could myself choose to get better at something and didn't need the permission of a boss. But I know that I myself was placing far too much emphasis on their approval and their permission. And that's not their fault. I think that's also partly just how I'm wired slightly. So it's also about shifting those wires and learning how to rewire some of that thinking.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast that explores the creative relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It's a creative exploration through stories, insights, resources, and tools to help you intentionally design your life and work. I'm your host, Brooke Eston, also known as the Creative Amplifier. I'm part strategist, part designer, part coach, and part artist. And I'm dedicated to helping fellow creatives bridge the gaps between those big dreams and practical realities. Now let's get into it. Our guest for today's episode is Lucy Alexandra Harper. She's a creative facilitator and multi-disciplinary designer. From graphic design to motion graphics to brand strategy and more, Lucy makes her living as a professional creative. I had the pleasure of meeting Lucy when I participated in the 100-Day Project, hosted by artist and author El Luna. For 100 consecutive days, we met for 30 minutes to work on an ongoing creative project. The whole idea of the 100-Day Project is that it is a free global art project for creatives who are charged to pick an action, do it consistently for 100 days, and share it with the world. In one of our sessions, Lucy shared an incredible story with the group of how she lost her job during the pandemic in a really painful and triggering way, and the creative recovery she did as she built a whole new set of skills that allowed her to build an empowering career as an independent creative. Born and bred in London, Lucy has explored many artistic mediums throughout her life, including dancing, acting, and painting. Feeling discouraged by rule-driven and product-focused expectations, she shares with us how she learned to develop a healthy relationship with her creativity. Through a beautiful and raw path of self-discovery, Lucy shares empowering moments in her life where major revelations about her own agency and power as an artist inspired her to stop asking for permission and to fully take charge of her education, career, and ultimately her life. Join us as we explore creative perseverance and ultimately triumph. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found, Lucy. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
I was really struck by your story when you shared it during the 100-Day Project hosted by El Luna. And your story was, yes, around your project, the thing you focused on for 100 days, but it was so much bigger than that. And it touched me and moved me and inspired me to see somebody having an experience that took them from a place of sort of just responding to a situation, reacting to a situation that had happened to them, to then moving to a place where you were able to, in essence, reclaim your power and redesign your future. And that the level of resiliency and creativity and gumption that your story had was something that struck me. So I'm so thrilled to dive into that story with you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's nice to hear you talk about it with a completely different perspective, because it's helping me look at it differently as well, which is great.
So before we get into the story of your rebounds and reinvention and moments of peak resilience, I would love to start from the very beginning when Lucy was just a young child exploring her world before you had too much structure and before you were at the developmental state where you could really incorporate other people's opinions of you, desires for you, before any of the should stuff started entering into the field. How did you explore and express your creativity?
My first memory of being creative, like with my hands, I guess, was in my parents' garden when I was younger. So I used to go outside and I would have a watering can and I would just sit down and I would make mud pies. So I would dig stuff up from the garden and sit there making these mud pies. And the garden at that stage belonged to the council and it was just completely like abandoned basically. So we had access to it, but we weren't allowed to make it into, well, I say we, I was probably like 4 or something, but we weren't allowed to make it into something like really beautiful or special. So it was just kind of this space that we could go into and explore and play in. And I have a lot of memories of just kind of solitary activity of just making these mud pies. And you know, there was no reason for it. And they weren't something that I then presented to my parents as this amazing thing I'd done. It was just very much like a process driven thing. Like I wanted to go out and get a bit dirty and a bit mucky. Yeah. And in terms of activities, sort of like artistic activities, I don't have many memories of drawing or painting or creating artworks like that, but I really did a lot of ballet and tap and drama. Yeah, I went to this amazing group every Saturday that was in like a community centre, and I would do about an hour of ballet and an hour of tap. And from the age of about 5 to 16, I did that, and that was so. When I look back on it, I'm like, that was amazing and so lucky. And I never saw myself as a dancer. I never even dreamed that I would do it as a profession. I just went along and expressed myself through my body. And actually, up until about the age of 13, I had the most amazing teachers that really weren't into it being like a professional activity that these children were doing. Like you had to wear a leotard, I think, but they weren't too fussed about like what you turned up wearing. It was more about moving your body and having a chat. And we used to have like cheese toasties and my mum would have a tea. And it was very like, it was a communal space as well as one of movement and dance. Yeah. And the same building basically ran drama lessons like every week after school. So that was kind of like my safe space. And those drama classes equally, they weren't about you getting into drama school or passing exams or anything like that. It was really like the most playful. I just have the best memories of it because we would just turn up, we would pretend to be octopuses and we would do a lot of improvisation and really play around. But actually before the stage where you're getting really anxious and nervous about standing up and not knowing what you're going to do. So it was all about the group of people that we were with and really like using our imaginations. And I'm so grateful now that I look back on those years that I had the teachers I had at those at that school, because I mean, it was just extra curricular stuff. So it wasn't really school led, which I think really helped because it was separated from my curriculum. And I can sort of pinpoint the moment with the dance where I fell out of love with it, which was when we had a new teacher come, and she was amazing, like super skilled. And she really knew what she was doing. And she came from a different dance school. And she obviously saw all this opportunity in these kids who were just turning up. And so she was saying, you know, well, have you done your grade 4 in ballet and your grade 5 in tap? Yeah. And I was like, no, that sounds horrible. I don't want to pass a test. That sounds awful. Yeah. And she put a lot of pressure on us, because there was one girl that did really want to go to dance school, and she's now a dancer in the West End and she's doing amazingly well. And so there was kind of this sudden pressure to to conform and to pass these grades. And I wasn't the best dancer in the room at all. And that suddenly became super apparent to me. So I think that's almost kind of creative journey up to the age of around 16, 17. Where I didn't feel those constrictions. And then it started to shift slightly.
Yeah, I think that's, you brought up a really important point, which is the difference between being on the professional track, which is about, and in dance, like it's about the performance. It's about the applause. It's about being able to say, I'm a dancer in the West End doing fantastic, right? Like it's outcome driven versus, it's so interesting that in the story that you shared, you brought together the ballet and tap, which, you know, a lot of people have kind of like militant memories of being in those classes where there's a clear right way and a clear wrong way. But you merge that with your memories of improv and drama and a play space and no pressure. And the difference between it being about the process and the experience versus it being about the outcome and what you're going to, you know, quote, do with it after the class is over. And this is something that I think has gotten really lost in our culture. And when we talk about being a creative person or being an artistic person, because I mean, imagine how terrible it would be if you couldn't play sports unless you were a professional athlete.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it becomes like all or nothing kind of situation. Like, well, then I won't do it at all.
Yeah.
And that really was what happened with the dance. But with the drama, because that was always such a safe space, and that the teacher that I had, she was so encouraging in every sense. That was really the thing that lived on in me, that I knew I wanted to become an actress.
Oh, wow.
I knew that was the thing. And then I started doing it in school as well as outside of school. So I had these parallel things going on. And in school, it was so much more structured and rigid because you were studying. It wasn't just like drama and play. It was theatre studies.
Yeah.
And so you had to do a lot of writing. And I just remember the dynamic of the class. If you picture the first class that I did in this community centre, like a circle, and people would dip in and dip out of it. And it was very open. Whereas at school, it was very much like a line of audience and then my teacher on the stage.
Yeah.
And they were like, I am the teacher. And I mean, they were also very inspiring people, but the dynamic of the group was what I was in. I realized I was far more interested in that and the connections that we were building with each other rather than the art of really learning how to perform well.
Yeah.
That didn't interest me. But I applied to drama schools 3 years in a row from the age of 17, 18, 19, because that was my absolute, the one thing I wanted to do. But I made the mistake of falling into the trap of thinking, well, if I'm going to do this, then I have to do it at the best drama schools. There is no in between for me. I've got to get into RADA, or I've got to get into LAMDA, or I've got to get into Guildhall, which like in the UK are the top schools with about 3,000 applicants. That was the beginning of like a really hard process for me of balancing this extremely creative act that I just had no judgment over for so long into suddenly this experience where you're walking into an audition room with a panel of 3 people that have never met you before. And you just have to recite these speeches and you don't get to play off anyone. Sometimes they give you a person in the room where they're like, you can use them, but they barely give you eye contact, and it's also impersonal, and it really strips the process from the outcome. And that was really hard for me, not getting into drama school.
Yeah.
Really tough.
When you received the letter saying, no, sorry. How did you then reshape your thinking to rechannel your energy into a new opportunity?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think at that age, it's particularly hard to process what's being said to you. All that I was able to recognize was the rejection. And I decided, well, if I don't get into drama schools, I can do this year which we call it an art foundation here. And it's actually a free course if you do it before you're 19. And you get to try out all of the different sort of vocational courses that you could do if you are a creative person. So you do,
cool.
I know, really cool. I mean, yeah, when I think back on it, like, that's great. I did a week of fashion design. I did a week of product design, a week of graphic design, a week of fine art and painting. And then at the end of that sort of rotation period, once you've tried your hand at all of those things, you get to choose which one you want to specialize in. And then at the end of the year, you kind of come away with a portfolio of work in your specialism.
Wow.
And so I went into that thinking, well, I'm going to paint because I really like using loads of oil paint. That's my favorite thing. And actually the graphic design tutors said to me, yes, you enjoy painting and it's something that you're good at, but why don't you think about doing graphic design? Because it's got a slightly more, you're using your skills, but in a commercial sense, that is a more reliable way of getting an income. And so if you can use your creativity to make money, it's just easier to do. You just get a job as a graphic designer, easy peasy. So that was sort of how that shift happened. It went from the painting and the drawing and being messy into this quite clean, rule-driven profession. So I'm now a graphic designer, and I do love it. But it doesn't feel like I sort of originated from this love of graphic design. It's sort of been quite a messy process.
Can you share a little bit about how that experience was for you internally, of once again kind of letting go of something that you've really wanted, that you had a vision for your future, and then getting the messages from other people that, maybe not that, how about this? So how was that internally and emotionally and spiritually for you to make that shift again and then settle into, okay, I'm a graphic designer and this is what I'm doing, and my creativity gets channeled into my day job?
I think for a long time I didn't settle into it, and I had a lot of resistance internally, which led to a certain amount of questioning and uncertainty. I think probably feels like the right word. My early 20s was just so riddled with doubt as to whether I was doing the right thing. But I also never quite let go of the drama thing. I think that really it was almost like, I don't know, going through some sort of breakup and you're like, oh yeah, but we'll get back together. It's fine. This isn't the end. And so for a long time, I think that actually kept me going. This thought that, well, I know that it's hard to get into drama schools, and they often say you're too young, come back in a few years, do something else, and come back. Sort of to answer your question, I think it meant that I have always jumped slightly and dipped my feet in, but never fully really like embraced one thing and allowing that one thing to be really hard and to then push through that. I was always following this quote unquote like creative path because I never really settled for, I was never going to become an accountant or someone that dealt with numbers, even though I know that can be very creative as well. But my sort of academic side was didn't have as much momentum. So although I was sitting within the boundaries of this creative pathway and I was still getting to do my hobbies of drama and acting, I always felt slightly frustrated. And I did end up applying to drama schools again.
No matter how much you try or commit to denying a fundamental part of who you are and what lights you up, like you're never going to be successful, and it feels shitty in the process of doing that also, because you're denying something that is like a soul food. And that feeling of having like a starving soul, it creates a ton of tension and anxiety and uncertainty and insecurity and all of these kind of toxic, poisonous feelings that enter our channel and enter our daily life. And for
Yeah.
many people, that manifests into like full-blown anxiety or depression or not being able to sleep or, different kinds of self-harm because you're trying to shift something that intuitively needs shifting, but you can't necessarily access it. So for some people, like it comes out in really self-destructive behaviors. And for others, it comes out in the hobby space. But there is that piece that does seem consistent around, like, once you know that gives you life and that gives you energy, and drama is my thing. Like I this is part of who I am. There has to be some type of alignment with that energy. Otherwise, it's going to continue to create that tension.
Yeah. And it's taken me a long time. So I'm almost 30 now. Yeah. But I think actually the reason I mentioned the applying to drama school again is because I think that was so useful for me to do. It's really hard to go through that again. It brought up a lot of emotions of rejection and feelings of rejection. But to do it almost 10 years after I'd done it the first time, it really made me feel like I was in control of it. And I was like, this is a choice. I'm doing this again because why not? Because no one can tell me that I can't. And I still made the same mistake of just applying to those same schools because I think it was almost like, I got to get into them and then I can reject them. And actually at that point, I was kind of like, I got through to the final round of some of them and I was really empowered by that. And I thought, do you know what? Maybe if I had just stuck with this, I would have got somewhere with it. And that's kind of nice to know. I don't need to know that, like, I don't feel like that as a huge loss anymore. I really was feeling quite unhappy at work and it was coming out in other ways. And then I think I was literally away with a friend and she just said to me, like, why don't you just apply again? Why are you living your life kind of waiting for it to happen, but you're not actually doing anything about it? And that, I think, is a recurring pattern for me specifically, of, like I said, trying these different things and never really settling for one, because as soon as it gets tough or as soon as you don't get in, then you sort of retract and stop and then think, okay, cool, I'll do the art thing or the design thing. So I feel like there's a couple of things I want to say about that, because actually I started doing some therapy simultaneous with the drama school applications, which was so helpful.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of therapy. I think everyone should do it as maintenance.
Yeah, absolutely. It brought up so much useful stuff for me. And it was actually started as bereavement counseling. And then it sort of turned into this. I mean, I had the most amazing woman who, she really coached me through my grief, and then also helped me talk about my creative life, because she recognized that something was off. And it's so much more than just needing therapy to fix one part of your life. It's all so holistic and involved. And I just remember her saying to me, because I was like, but I want to do the drama, but then, but I do really like graphic design. Maybe I could be like a creative strategist, because I love thinking about things and problem solving. But then I also write poetry, and sometimes I read a poem and I just think, God, I want to be a poet, and I want to stand up and I want to perform poetry, and then I'll go to the theatre, and then I'll want to be an actress. And she was like, whoa. She's like, great, really good that you're so passionate about lots of different things, but you're being like your own barrier to succeeding in any of these things because you're not letting yourself try them for long enough. So it comes back to that.
That got me. I see myself in that too.
And it really made me stand up and be like, okay, you can't just keep talking about all these things that you're passionate about and basically getting distracted by the poetic nature of these things, because there is a difference, which is what we were talking about with the 100-day project. There's a difference between putting the hard work in and really like turning up and doing it and wanting to do it. They're very different things. So that helped me, because she helped me frame work, she said, okay, so if you want to really do the drama thing, what do you need to do to make something change? And at this point, I was working full time as a graphic designer. So I said, well, I probably need to go freelance. I don't know, but I think that might help me free up some of my time so I can become more flexible and still be doing the design, which I absolutely love, but manage to fit in the time to do some of the drama. And so then it was like, cool, okay, well, you need to go off and become freelance. And did I do that? No, not at that point. Way too scary. But I knew that maybe that was like a pathway that I could take. And I guess it sort of helped me to build up the courage. So yeah, I just thought that was an interesting conversation to relate to in the context of this.
Yeah. And I see, like I said, I see so much of myself in that. And the way that I described it or articulated it wasn't as hard hitting as your therapist, which really just like went straight to the bullseye of it. But I always felt like opportunity and inspiration is not my problem. Decisions and commitments are. And I think a lot of creative people would identify with being multi-passionate, right? Because that gets expressed, that creative energy has so many opportunities for expression, both inside the traditional arts and outside, right? Like people express their creativity through their planning of events for people that they love, or making meals to commemorate some special occasion, or, you know, these things that are outside of the traditional arts. And I think it's really important to first understand the difference of what are you doing for you because it makes your soul come alive, and what are you doing so that you can pay your rent consistently. And they may be the same thing. There may be overlap, but I think for a lot of creative people, they also can coexist completely separately. Even Einstein had a full-time job. He worked in the patent office. Like he had a 9 to 5 as he was creatively making sense of the universe that we live in. You know, like there definitely are lots of alternative forms than the only path that so many of us believe is open to us, which is all or nothing. When you break it down and ask the questions like your therapist asked you and kind of coach you through it of like, okay, if that's what you want to do, how do you start to make that happen? Right? The first step is not just quitting your job and going straight into doing drama full time. The first step is like, okay, I'm going to pull back just a little bit here so I can create more space for this thing to enter my life and play a more active role.
Yeah. And then you really can see whether it's something that you truly want to pursue, or whether it's just something that you actually are okay with as being in the hobby space or the sort of just creative space. But actually, I think because of the pandemic, it meant that I wasn't able to actively be as involved with any theatre projects or drama.
Yeah.
Which kind of just quietened that bit of my soul. It kind of like gave me an excuse to not to have to put so much pressure on myself to be in a play or performing or with a group or anything like that. I kind of just was like, okay, that's literally, I just put it on pause and was then able to really think about all the other side of, you know, the artistic side, the design side, because there's no doubt that I also loved that. Yeah. I just sort of got into a space where I had a really unhealthy relationship with it.
Right.
Because I felt like it was holding me back from doing the drama stuff. And then when the pandemic hit, I wasn't able to do the drama stuff anyway. So it was like, okay, cool. Well, maybe just take a year or so to really focus on where else you can be truly creative.
Yeah. Would you share a little bit about, about this most recent experience of the transition that you've made creatively and what that means for you on both a personal level and also a professional level?
I was actually furloughed at the beginning of the pandemic, which in the UK has been this scheme where basically you get paid 80% of your salary, but you don't do any work because you can't feasibly work. And it's a way of the company saving some money. So the government pays you the 80% of your salary, and then but your job is kind of safe and kept for you when things open up again. And actually that period of time for me, we had the craziest weather in the UK. It was like summer from April. So as soon as everything went crazy in the world, the sun just came out and was blue skies.
That almost never happens in the UK.
No, it's so rare. But it really was this bizarre thing because it made the time that I had, so I was no longer working, but I was able to go outside, sit in the garden. I suddenly had all this free time, and it's so bizarre. I mean, that will probably never happen to me ever again, because I had from the month of April up until June to really focus on myself. I started meditating and sort of built up this rhythm and routine for my life that I really enjoyed. And I suddenly had that feeling of like, or the recognition that actually I wasn't missing my day job. And that was really important for me because I really enjoyed working there, and I had a great group of people around me, but I just didn't miss doing the work. And I was like, but the work is the bit that I'm spending the majority of my time on. So that was concerning for me. I think that was just a kind of like a lightning bolt almost that was like, maybe you need to address this. And then what actually happened was in the June of that year, I lost my job anyway because I got made redundant. And I think although I still had those feelings of rejection that I think everyone goes through when you get made redundant, and that feeling of like, basically, are you useful? No, you're not, therefore. And it's obviously not, are you useful? Is your role useful? But that was something that I really struggled with. And also the reasons that were given were because I didn't have the digital skills to flourish in a sort of increasingly digitalized world. And that was scary for me to be told that. And so that was sort of the start of that, a real shift where I was like, okay, well, despite the fact that the kind of the system, as in the system of having a job and having a salary, has kind of chucked me out the other end and said, see you later, you're on your own, was really scary, but suddenly became this incredible opportunity where I had cultivated this creative lifestyle where I was drawing more and I was doing illustrations because I had all this spare time, and I really didn't want to let go of that. And it was basically saying, this can carry on to a certain extent. You can continue to choose how you're spending your time, who you're working for, how many income streams you're having. And I also, like you said about the universe, crazy stuff can happen. So the same week I got made redundant, literally like 3 days later, I got a phone call from someone that I used to work with at a place called the Do Lectures, which is this inspirational ideas festival. And this person rang me and said, I've got a project. I need you to work on it for 8 weeks. We need you, Lucy. I was like, oh my God, just at that point where you're like at your lowest, feeling like, oh, I can't, maybe the graphic design thing wasn't for me either. Crap, I've really made the wrong decision here. All of a sudden, this person kind of came back into my life and was like, you have multiple things to offer, not just your commercial graphic design skill. We just want you to be on the team. And that was amazing for me. It really, really helped my confidence. So I think that was very lucky that happened at that time, because it also just helped me be like, wow, cool. Okay. So now all I need to worry about is like what happens after these 8 weeks are up. And I started to really shift my thinking and how I looked at how I was living my life, of like, okay, maybe it's not about this endless road of work that's running deep into the future that I have no control over. It's actually, short, sharp bursts of projects that can help me pay my bills, and also like give me that creative freedom. So I guess my creative freedom kind of slapped me in the face a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And creativity needs restraints. Like there needs to be some kind of boundary so you know what sandbox you're playing in. Without that, it can feel really intimidating or really overwhelming. As a painter, like going to a blank canvas can sometimes be like, whew, I can't. But if I pick out my color palette first, or I decide like I'm in a blue period, everything's going to be blue. Like it flows so much easier because there is some boundary and some constraint around it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was when, I sort of just said to myself, try it for 6 months, see how you go. And if you're still able to pay your rent, then maybe it's worth sticking at. And then around the 6-month mark, just over that, was when I saw that El Luna was doing the 100-day project.
Yeah.
And there was definitely something in my mind that, so I've always enjoyed doing animations and making motion graphics, but I think there was something in my mind that really wanted to fight back against the voices that had said, you don't have the digital skills, because I was like, well, those are skills I can learn. And
thank you. Can we just like highlight that and repeat that? I feel like if I was Oprah right now, I'd be screaming, that's a tweetable. It's a tweetable. Like skills are learned.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of a sudden I was in charge of my own professional development. And that's the first time. I'm like almost 30 and I'm only just feeling empowered enough to be like, no, these are the things I want to learn, because actually I want to try and make some money from making animations, because everyone wants stuff to move at the moment, which is true. Like it is an increasingly digitalized world, but applying my creativity to learning those skills during the 100-day project really made me realize, okay, cool, I've actually done this now. And I'm not finished the 100 days. Partly because I got so distracted with some other work that's come in off the back of doing the 100-day project, which I absolutely did not expect. Part of the success of that project for me was just taking control of my own learning, which had never even occurred to me really before, that I could myself choose to get better at something and didn't need the permission of a boss or someone who had like way more status than me, or was further up the hierarchy than me. And I have worked with some amazing women that have really helped nurture my learning. And they've been wonderful, but I know that I myself was placing far too much emphasis on their approval and their permission. And that's not their fault. I think that's also partly just how I'm wired slightly. So it's also about shifting those wires and learning how to rewire some of that thinking, because it's not always helpful. When your rent is dependent on your own learning and your own development, it suddenly becomes like, cool, I'm going to take responsibility for this now.
And I would even go as far as saying, yes, I think we are wired that way, but I don't think we come into the world that way. I think we get wired when we go through the education system and living in I'm taking it there, living in a patriarchal society, in a capitalist society, because of two things. One is the creation of monetary value is the most important thing. I mean, probably a little bit less so in the UK than in the US, where I'm technically from, where I'm physically from. Yeah, I think there's that element of it. And then there's also the control element, the domination element, because the modern day school system was built during the industrial age, where they were training people to then go work in the factories. So you needed to crush people's spirits to a certain point so that they would comply. And that is still the education system that we pretty much all of us have gone through, with very few exceptions. There's alternative schools like, Waldorf or Montessori or stuff like that. And then inside the schooling system, sometimes you get these unicorn teachers that can really hold that protective space for your own development and creativity that isn't results driven, that isn't tested, that isn't you ace this or you failed this, you can continue or you go back. Like removing that is an important part of being able to, I think, overcome these limiting beliefs that were conditioned into us as our creativity was conditioned out of us. Could you imagine a society of fully embodied, empowered, creative people? Like they're not going to listen to authority. They're not going to, color in between the lines. Like it's threatening for the power structure dynamic that we currently exist in. Yeah. So I think it's important to call that out also so that people don't take it on themselves as a personal flaw. Like maybe I'm just, there's something wrong with me, or I didn't realize this, or I didn't know this. Because from my perspective, it's like, yeah, you and everybody else, myself included. And there is a process of a breaking and a loss that has to happen. And generally that space is pretty cleared out for you to then rebuild yourself, right? Like the people go away, the structures fall away, the money gets tight, like everything kind of just goes and clears the space. So you have an opportunity to reinvent yourself and become more flexible and resilient in the process. And that's what I mean when I talk about creative transformation. I'm not talking about art, although art is a perfectly fine, expression of that. It's not a synonym. And that's the space I'm trying to expand and the energy that I'm trying to liberate, because you're speaking to it, the difference in the way that you feel and what you're capable of doing in the world when you claim your power and you tell yourself like, oh, I need those skills. Well, I can learn those skills. I got Google, I got YouTube. There's for everything. Like put a call out on Facebook. Does anybody know how to do this? And for sure, you're going to get responses. Like we've never been better positioned to be able to do that. But I think the mental rewiring that you were speaking about is a necessary step in order to prime us and create that foundation for us to jump off of.
Yeah, absolutely. And having the underlying confidence, which I think also is required to like be rebuilt up. Yeah. Because one thing I noticed working for companies, like larger companies, is that there's a lot of ego. And I don't mean that in the sense that everyone seems extremely egotistical, but the results driven nature of it and the like, my idea, this is kind of coming from me rather than this like shared approach.
Yeah.
I think is something that is just quite challenging when you're truly trying to come at it from a really authentically creative space where nothing has been done before, and therefore you're not trying to copy what other people have done. I did some work with Adobe and I won a commission that I thought nothing would come of this, but then I ended up doing like some social content for them because again, they'd seen my Instagram and they were like, we really like what you're doing. And at this point, I'd really started to post my own creative projects. So collages and illustrations and things that had truly come out of the space of being able to explore my own creativity. Because, and this is a slight sidestep, but
yeah,
during the pandemic, when I was furloughed and I had nothing to do, and I mentioned that I really found this space where I was much more comfortable with my creativity, I'd started making collages and I'd put a call out on Instagram to say, anyone who wants a letter in isolation, let me know and I will write to you and I'll send you a piece of art. And it might be a poem or it might be a collage, it might be anything. Wow. And at this point, I really didn't know what it would be. And then it turned into a much bigger project called Letters in Isolation, where I had so many people get back to me and say, please, like I'd love to receive something in the post. So that was really a really nice way for me to be making stuff. It had a purpose because it was going to someone else and that was all it needed to be. It didn't need to be anything more than that. But I had a reason to sit down every day and it turned into this big collage fest, and I'd never even tried collage before last year. And I was like, wow, this is so fun. You get to play with composition, like all of these skills that I've been honing over the years as a designer, and had sometimes found a bit boring or frustrating because you're just on a computer. I was able to put them all onto the page and make these collages. So I think I sent about around 50 letters to people.
Wow.
And I actually really didn't want to stop, but I was just like, it was so time consuming.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'd started posting some of those on my Instagram, which I think is what the Adobe people had seen. And they were also just really lovely client to work with. And so they work for the Adobe education, like creative educators. So they're setting up courses to help teachers basically teach creativity in schools.
Cool.
So again, that like really aligned with the kind of work that I want to be doing.
Yeah.
The first sort of pitch that I put forward, and then I'd won the work, and that was with a partnership of cultural organizations, and they call themselves the Culture Mile. They did a huge report into the effects of creativity in the commercial sector, which you would be very interested in reading,
Definitely.
I'm sure, Brooke.
Yeah.
And so they just needed the report designed. And so it's like a 50-page report, but it's full of all of this research. And most importantly for them is there's loads of statistics that's like, it is so clear from these statistics that creativity can increase your productivity. It can increase your revenue. Like, it's not even up for discussion anymore, guys.
Yeah.
It's all here and it's all in a report. So I worked on that with a friend of mine who, luckily, because the budget was so big, I was able to pull her in and have her work on that with me, which was such an amazing step for me, because I just felt like it's so much more than like having an employee. It's obviously, it's just a collaboration between two people who are really aligned, and she's so talented, and I felt so lucky to have her help and to work with her on it. But also I stepped into the space of project lead. You know, I was the one sort of building the momentum with it, and that worked, and that was fine. And it was just, I think it was a real treat to get to work with her on it. And the result is something I'm really proud of now. And also the content is something that I really want to share with people. So it feels like all of this stuff is kind of aligning. And then they were like, oh yeah, could you, well, they didn't actually ask. I said, do you want a video?
Yeah.
And they said, yeah. So they're now, they've got a video that summarizes all of the findings of the report.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's like these building blocks for the different things I want to be doing. So it's really become something that's quite exciting and has momentum, and I hope that it continues. But I think I'm also still figuring out how to keep that momentum going, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So in closing here, I have just a couple of more questions. One is related to that maintenance, right? Like, how do you, now that you've gotten to this place where you understand your own ability to learn and develop your skills, you have gotten to a place where you have more evidence that what you have to offer is really valuable and well received by, some big players. Adobe is like the number one in the creative design space. I would love to hear how you keep yourself mentally in that place of, yes, there is uncertainty, and the line between anxiety of uncertainty and excitement for possibility can be very thin. So how do you keep yourself out of the anxious and freaking out, I don't know what's coming next space, and really align yourself to noticing opportunities and trusting yourself to be able to spot them and get them?
So I'd say that I don't tend to keep myself out of the anxious place. In that I try to sit with that anxiety when it comes, because the reality is it always does.
Yeah.
And the more in the past that I've tried to fight that and think, get out, the more I've sort of built a hole for myself. So when those feelings come, I try to lean into them a little bit and think, okay, what are the practical reasons why this is happening? Okay, it's because you don't necessarily know what your next project is, or you don't have a big project coming up, because often I have a lot of small things which keep me going and keep me busy. But financially, the fear comes when there's no big project, right? So I try to just sit with it. And the truth is, something has always come up. And so that's what I always lean into, is like, you have to trust that something will. And for me, part of that process is talking to friends about it, talking to my boyfriend. He's so supportive and always just reassures me. He's like, yeah, but we've been here before. Haven't you been here before? Haven't you learned that actually things will probably be okay? So I think it's really hard. Your question is really hard to really stay in the excited momentum. But at the start of every project, I get that kick of adrenaline and like, this is so worth it. And also when you're winning work yourself, that's something that usually only a creative director gets to get the thrill of, right? With obviously with their team's help, but it's very rewarding. And so I'm trying to be careful not to keep chasing more work just to get that hit of, yes, I'm doing it, and more work. But I do think it's a balance, and not being so drawn into the anxiety that it stops you from doing what you're doing. But I've come to a point now, I think, where I've come too far to really let it pull me back again. And I think it would be it would have to be something like really practical reasons why I might go back into a full-time job, I suppose, because I feel like I have this secret that I now want to tell everyone who's creative, which is, you can go freelance. And it's not as scary as it sounds. Obviously, it's challenging. And that's why I wanted to answer your question honestly, because there are moments of anxiety. But I also had those moments in a full-time job. And also, one important thing to say is that the financial side of things can be the scariest part of, or what might stop someone from going freelance. And yet, look at me, I had a full-time job and they dropped me. So I know that's quite a blunt way of putting it, but essentially, if you're working for a company and they can't afford to pay you anymore, they will wave goodbye to you. So I just want to encourage people to make that call for themselves rather than letting someone else make that decision for them.
Remember your own power. Right. And sometimes that comes through trust. Sometimes that comes through resilience. Sometimes that comes through experimentation, like whatever package that comes from or comes in. It seems like the essence of the message is pretty consistent around, like, you'll be okay. If you don't abandon yourself, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
I think that also came through in the last question I asked about how, like, moving from anxiety to excitement and how you navigate that space. And I love your honest, authentic answer, which is, I move through that. I don't try to avoid it, because if I try to outrun it, it's almost like a tsunami or something. Like, it eventually will come for you in such an intense way that you can't really outrun that. You just have to come to a place where you can have a healthy relationship with the full complexity of the human experience, and that uncertainty, that self-doubt, that inconsistency of our faith and our energy and our changing visions. Like, that's part of it. And the process of following curiosity and experimentation and trusting yourself and being open to opportunities seems to be the most consistent pathway towards achieving a creative lifestyle that's really nourishing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just to add to that, so in terms of advice, this is something that's come up in our conversation quite a lot, but I would say not to give up when things get a little bit difficult, if you know that the thing that you're doing is worth doing, because I've so often come up against that. And there are still things that I want to revisit with my writing and with my poetry. And I still see myself as those things. But if I hadn't have sort of stopped just because I didn't get to the level that I was hoping I would get to, then I think I could have progressed it much more. So just, and also that echoes again, the 100-day project, like turn up every day, do the work, don't shy away from the difficulties that the work is, because the chances are if you're finding it hard, it means that you're making progress.
So for anybody who wants to follow along with your creative journey and all of the things that you're stepping into now, where would be the best places to find you?
So probably my Instagram is the best place. That is just at Lucy Alexandra Harper. That's my handle. And then I also have a website as well, which is lucyalexandraharper.co.uk.
Wonderful. Well, Lucy, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. The time just completely flew during the whole thing. No. So I love when that happens. That for me is like the evidence that the muse and the creative energy is flowing in the conversation. And that is exactly what I'm trying to cultivate. So.
Oh, well, Brooke, thank you so much. I think, this is such an amazing opportunity to talk to you, and it's been very nourishing for me. So thank you very much.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.